Hey there, and welcome to Family Revenge. We're so glad you're here. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can stay with us for every twist and turn. Let's jump right in. Dinner at my parents' house was always like this quiet, predictable, the same old routine. I sat at the table between my older brother Ryan and my mom. Dad was at the head of the table, as usual, the kind of guy who never hesitated to speak his mind. So, Sarah, Dad started without even looking up from his plate. Still stuck behind a desk, huh? I thought you'd be out there doing real work by now. His voice was casual, but the implication was clear. I wasn't doing anything important. Mom chuckled lightly, like it was some kind of joke. Ryan looked up from his phone for half a second, then back down, offering no help. No one seemed to notice the way the words stung. I stayed quiet, pushing my food around on the plate. I wasn't hungry anyway. My job, the one I'd worked my ass off to get, was just a joke to them, a desk job. Like I hadn't been out in the field, responding to calls, handling situations that'd make most people run in the other direction. The conversation shifted quickly. Ryan got a new job, something in finance. Dad asked him about it like it was the most interesting thing ever. They talked about the weather, the garden, anything but me. I felt invisible. I swallowed the hurt, but it didn't go away. I thought about all the shit I'd been through on the force, those late night shifts, the cases that stuck with me, the people I'd helped. None of them ever asked about that. Hell, I hadn't even gotten a "how's work going?" since I became an officer. Not once. I was done trying. Dinner dragged on, but my mind had already checked out. I wasn't there anymore. The conversation continued around me, but it all sounded like muffled noise. Ryan was talking about his new boss, and Mom asked him the same questions she always did, trying to sound interested. Dad barely responded. He didn't have to. Everyone knew what he thought. I wasn't part of any of it. I sat there, pushing my food around, my mind elsewhere. It wasn't just the dinner that was suffocating, it was the whole damn house. Everything in it reminded me of the past, of who I used to be, and who they still saw me as. The little girl who never quite grew up in their eyes. But that wasn't me anymore. I remembered a case from last year, a hostage situation. A damn standoff with a man who had a gun to his girlfriend's head in the middle of a crowded apartment building. It was my team's call, but it was my negotiation that got them out alive. I had been on the phone with that guy for what felt like hours, trying to keep him calm while the whole building shook with tension. I remember my hands shaking at first, but I kept my voice steady. It was a game of trust. Get him to believe I was on his side, that he wasn't just some animal backed into a corner. I was the only one who got through to him. When the SWAT team finally moved in and the hostages were freed, my captain pulled me aside. "Good work, Sarah," he said, his voice a little too loud in my ear. But it wasn't just for me, it was for everyone to hear. You handled that like a pro. At that moment, I felt like maybe I could finally believe in myself. Maybe I was good at this. But at this table, none of that mattered. None of it would ever matter to my father. I snapped back to the present, where Dad was talking to Mom about the lawn, and I realized how completely invisible I had become to them. The dinner dragged on, the silence eating at me, each small talk exchange more hollow than the last. I couldn't sit there anymore, so I pushed my chair back and excused myself without a word. I went up to my old room, the one that felt like a museum of things I'd left behind. I shut the door behind me, the familiar smell of childhood filling my lungs, and immediately my eyes went to the shelves stacked with old trophies and framed pictures of high school friends. Some of it made me feel nostalgic, but mostly it reminded me how far I'd come from that girl, the one who thought she could have it all, just like everyone else. I sat on my bed, pulling my phone out to distract myself. Work texts filled my inbox, case updates, routine check-ins. I scrolled through them, resisting the urge to dive back into it. It felt like I'd been constantly available for everyone else, but for once, I wanted silence. I didn't want to think about the next case, or what would be expected of me when I got back to the precinct. Then my phone buzzed again, a message from Lieutenant Harris. "Hey, Sarah, just wanted to give you a heads up. You're being considered for detective. You've earned it. We'll be talking soon." For a moment, the words didn't register. Detective. I blinked, rereading the message. I felt a jolt in my chest, but it wasn't just excitement, it was uncertainty. I had worked so damn hard for this, but it felt unreal. I didn't know how to process it, not with my family's rejection still hanging over me. I put my phone down, feeling the weight of it all. The promotion, the dinner, my father's lack of support, it was a lot to carry, and I wasn't sure I could handle any more of it. I tried to shake it off, but sleep didn't come easily that night. I must have fallen asleep eventually, but it wasn't a restful sleep. The buzzing of my phone startled me awake, and for a moment, I thought it was just another work update. But when I glanced at the screen, I froze. Police commissioner. My stomach flipped. I stared at the phone for a second before answering, unsure what to expect. This is Sarah. Sarah, it's Commissioner Rios. His voice was warm, authoritative, but still somehow personal. I'm calling to let you know that you've been nominated for Detective of the Year. I blinked, momentarily speechless. What? You've earned it. No one in the department has had the impact you've had this year. Your leadership, your commitment, it's been recognized, and we're proud to have you on the team. The words swirled around in my head, but I couldn't catch them. Detective of the Year? I repeated, trying to wrap my mind around it. Was this real? This was bigger than any promotion. This was recognition, not just for me, but from everyone I worked with. It was the kind of thing you didn't get by luck. You had to earn it. But it felt strange, too, almost like a dream. Absolutely, Rios said, his tone softening slightly. I'll be sending over the details soon, but I wanted you to know personally, you've earned the respect of your colleagues and your superiors. You've earned our respect. I swallowed, the weight of his words sinking in, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't fit. I felt a sense of pride in my work, sure, but with everything that had gone on with my family, it felt disconnected. Like no matter how much recognition I got from the department, it wouldn't matter at home. Thank you, Commissioner, I said, my voice almost flat. I appreciate it. The call ended with more congratulations, but I didn't hear any of it. I set the phone down, my hand shaking a little, unsure how to process what had just happened. Detective of the Year? It should have felt like a victory, but it felt hollow. My father would probably just scoff at it. My mom would probably forget it before dessert. Ryan? He'd probably say it wasn't anything compared to his bonus. I looked around my room, the silence of it pressing in on me. My eyes fell on the old, worn-out trophies on the shelf, the ones I had earned back when I was still trying to make them proud. That girl didn't exist anymore, but I was still carrying her around. I leaned back against the bed, staring at the ceiling. The award, the recognition, it didn't mean much if the people who mattered most to me couldn't even see what I was doing. The next morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at the woman who stared back. My face was a little tired, the lines around my eyes a little deeper than they used to be. But she looked stronger than I had remembered. She looked like someone who had fought for every inch of ground she stood on. I didn't recognize the girl who had been so desperate for approval anymore. I hadn't realized it at the time, but that girl had disappeared the day I put on my badge. I ran my fingers through my hair and took a deep breath, mentally preparing for what I would have to say the next time I saw my parents. How would I tell them? Would I even tell them? Maybe they'd shrug it off like everything else. But I couldn't let that stop me from owning this achievement. I had earned this, every single part of it. It didn't matter that they might not understand or that they might dismiss it. I was no longer waiting for them to give me permission to be proud of myself, but the thought of telling them still made me uneasy. What if they just didn't care? What if it was the same silence, the same indifference? I sighed and wiped my face, then grabbed my phone to check the messages from work. Another update about the new investigation, something about a missing person case, and I could already feel my mind shifting back to the job, back to where I felt like I mattered. I almost replied, but paused, clicking the screen off instead. The weight of last night's conversation with the commissioner was still fresh, and I wanted a few more minutes to hold on to it before I slipped back into the grind. Before I could get lost in it, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from Lieutenant Harris. Hey, Sarah, you've been nominated for Detective of the Year. This is huge. Let's talk soon. Congratulations again. I stared at it for a moment, my heart racing again. It was real. I wasn't imagining it. But still, the feeling of emptiness lingered. How could I feel so conflicted about something I had worked so hard for? It was the same as everything else. A victory, but a quiet one. No applause, no family standing behind me, proud of what I had done. I glanced back at the mirror, the woman I had become staring back. The question wasn't about whether I deserved it. The question was whether I could keep carrying these achievements in silence. Sunday dinner was a ritual I had stopped looking forward to a long time ago, but tonight felt different. Maybe because I was tired of pretending like I wasn't drowning in the silence between us. Or maybe because, despite everything, I had something to prove. Not to them, but to myself. I stepped into my parents' house with a little more determination in my step. Mom was already bustling around the kitchen, as usual, and Dad sat in his spot at the head of the table, flipping through a newspaper. Ryan, predictably, was on his phone, barely glancing up as I walked in. "Hey, Sarah," Ryan said, his voice almost an afterthought. "Hey, Ryan," I replied, keeping it short. I didn't need pleasantries, not tonight. Mom gave me a quick smile and a hug, then nodded to the table. "You're just in time." We were talking about Ryan's new promotion. She shot Ryan an affectionate look, clearly proud. Ryan didn't look up. "Yeah, I'm moving into a management role now. Things are looking good." His voice was flat, but he was used to it by now. Dad didn't even look up from his paper. "Well, that's good. You need a good job to support a family, right?" The remark stung, but I let it go for a second. This wasn't about Ryan. This was about me. As we settled into our usual spots, I felt the familiar wave of frustration rise in my chest. It was like a script, and no one ever deviated from it. The weather came up next, the latest news about some local event, all the small talk that meant nothing. And then it happened. Dad's voice, that dismissive tone again. "So Sarah, still doing that cop thing? Must be nice to have a desk job, huh?" I felt my jaw clench, but I stayed calm. I had a choice now. I didn't have to take it. "Actually," I said, letting the words hang in the air, "I've been nominated for Detective of the Year." There was a long pause, a beat that felt like an eternity. Dad's fork froze midair, his eyes darting up to meet mine. His expression twisted, disbelieving. "What?" His voice was sharper than usual. "Detective of the Year," I repeated casually, like it didn't matter. "The commissioner called me personally yesterday to tell me I'd been nominated. It's for all the work I've done this year, especially the hostage rescue. It's a big deal." Mom blinked, trying to process it, but her mouth was already opening, probably to deflect. "Well, that's nice, sweetie, but we were talking about Ryan's promotion. Isn't that exciting?" I held up my hand, not letting her redirect. "I'm not done. I've worked my ass off for years, Dad. I'm not some secretary. I'm not just filling a quota. I earned this, and I'm tired of pretending I haven't." Dad's face tightened, the disbelief hardening into something more defensive. His fork clattered onto his plate, but he didn't pick it back up. Instead, his eyes narrowed at me, like he couldn't decide if he was more angry or confused. "You think that's something? That you're better than this?" I didn't flinch. "I think it's something. And if you could just for once acknowledge that I've worked harder than you've ever given me credit for, maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation." Ryan still hadn't said a word, his eyes glued to his plate. I almost wanted to scream at him to say something, anything. But he stayed quiet. That was Ryan's way, always taking the path of least resistance, never getting involved, always letting things slide. Dad cleared his throat, trying to brush me off like I was some errant child. "You've been pushing this whole career thing for years, Sarah. Maybe it's time to stop chasing something that doesn't matter." I felt the anger rise, but I wasn't going to let him see it. "You don't get it, do you?" I said, voice low. "This isn't about you. It's about me finally earning something I can be proud of, and I'm not going to hide it anymore. You might not understand it, but I don't need your approval to know I've earned it." There was a beat of silence, a thick, uncomfortable air that seemed to fill the room. Mom's attempts to lighten the mood fell flat, her voice trailing off. Ryan kept staring at his plate, probably wishing he wasn't even here. I pushed my chair back, the scrape of it loud in the stillness. "I'm done. I'll be upstairs if anyone wants to talk to me." My tone was sharp, but I didn't care. As I walked toward the stairs, I could feel Dad's eyes on me, the weight of his disappointment pressing down. But this time, it didn't matter. Not anymore. The door to my old bedroom shut behind me with a soft thud. The silence was deafening, but it felt different this time. It wasn't suffocating. It was mine. I sank onto the bed, staring at the wall. Another Sunday dinner, another moment of proving that I was never going to be the daughter they wanted. But maybe, just maybe, that was the point. I woke up early the next morning, too restless to lie in bed. My thoughts were a mess, and the last thing I wanted to do was stew in them. I pulled on my running shoes and hit the pavement, letting my legs do the thinking while I tried to work through the knots in my chest. The morning air was crisp, but it wasn't enough to calm the simmering anger inside me. I ran hard, pushing my body to release the frustration I'd been holding onto for years. My father's face still burned in my mind. The disbelief, the dismissal. He didn't get it. He didn't get me. I remembered my first year on the force, how I'd almost been fired for overstepping. It was a case I took on, despite being told to back off. A string of missing persons had gone cold, and I wasn't going to let it stay that way. I dug deeper than anyone expected, asked the questions no one wanted to hear. It didn't end well at first. My captain called me into his office, and the words, fireable offense, hung in the air like smoke. But I wasn't backing down. I fought for that case. I fought for the chance to prove myself. In the end, my captain relented, gave me the case, and I solved it. The missing people were found, alive, and it got me a commendation. I'd never been prouder. That moment, the moment I didn't let them shut me down, the moment I knew I could fight back, kept me going. And yet, here I was, stuck with a father who didn't think I belonged in this world at all. A man who thought women should stay in their place, somewhere safer, and keep their noses out of things like law enforcement, who still thought I was that naive girl who couldn't handle the tough stuff. The run wasn't enough to clear my mind. It never was. When I got back to the house, the door creaked as I pushed it open. The house felt still, too quiet. I tossed my keys onto the counter and heard the soft murmur of my father's voice. He was in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, staring out the window like he always did when he was lost in thought. I didn't know if I was ready for this, but I didn't have a choice. I stepped into the kitchen, not bothering to greet him. He didn't acknowledge me at first, but I could feel the tension thick in the air. Finally, he sighed, looked up at me, and lowered the mug, setting it down with a clink. "You serious about this promotion?" His voice was steady, but there was something cold underneath, a tone I recognized. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "You mean the Detective of the Year nomination?" "Yeah, that," he said, eyes narrowing slightly. "You think you're really cut out for this, leading men, making big decisions?" His tone shifted, hardening. "Women like you don't belong in roles like that. It's a man's job." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. It was exactly what I expected from him, but still, he always knew how to twist the knife. I took a breath, forcing myself not to lose my cool. "I've been cut out for it since the moment I walked into that precinct. This isn't about gender, Dad. It's about who's best for the job. And I'm the best for the job." His eyes flashed with something, disbelief or maybe just contempt. I couldn't tell. He shook his head. "It's not that simple. There's a reason men have always been at the top in places like that. Women they don't have what it takes to make those kinds of decisions." I stepped forward, feeling the heat rise in me. "I have what it takes, Dad, and I've earned my place. I'm not some charity case or some token hire. This isn't about diversity quotas, like you like to think. It's about my skills, my experience. I've proven myself over and over, just like the men who came before me." His gaze hardened, but he didn't speak. The silence between us felt thick, like we were both staring at an impossible divide. I wasn't going to back down. I've been doing this job for years. I've seen things you can't even imagine. I've made decisions that put my life on the line. "And if you can't respect that, then that's on you," I said, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside. He opened his mouth to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned on my heel and walked out of the kitchen, the air between us still crackling with tension. I didn't know what else to say, what else to do. I was so damn tired of fighting to be seen. But for once, I didn't care if he ever understood. I was done waiting for his approval. I went upstairs, shutting the door to my room behind me. The silence felt different now, heavy but not in the way it had been before. This time, it was a silence that belonged to me. The next evening, the news broke. It wasn't even anything major, just a short segment on the local broadcast, a few quick mentions of the department's recent achievements. But there I was, front and center. The screen flashed with a clip of the commissioner talking about my work. My captain's words about the hostage rescue echoed in the background. My colleagues, people I'd worked with, respected, smiled as they praised me. They didn't hesitate to tell the world that I was good at what I did, that I had earned the respect of my department. I wasn't sure how to feel about it. It was the recognition I'd fought for, but it didn't feel like a victory. The phone started buzzing with calls and messages. Congratulations from coworkers, texts from friends, even a few from people I didn't expect. I felt a brief warmth, but it was overshadowed by the thick silence coming from the living room. I walked into the room where my parents were watching TV. Dad was sitting in his recliner, sipping his usual cup of coffee, his eyes fixed on the screen. When the segment about me came on, he didn't flinch. He didn't react at all. The words about my career achievements filled the room, the sound of my name echoing through the speakers, but the silence from Dad was louder. The lack of any acknowledgement, any recognition was deafening. Mom gave a small, uncomfortable smile, but it quickly faded as Dad's expression remained unchanged. He didn't move, didn't even change his posture. His eyes stayed locked on the TV, but I could tell he wasn't seeing anything anymore. He was lost in his thoughts, somewhere I couldn't reach. I turned and walked away, my heart heavier with every step. At dinner, the tension was unbearable. It wasn't the normal quiet, it was something different, something more fragile. Ryan was tapping his fork nervously, not saying anything. Mom kept glancing between the two of us, clearly unsure of how to handle the shift. I took a breath, and for the first time, I decided I wasn't going to let it slide. "I'll be moving to a new precinct once the promotion goes through," I said, keeping my voice steady, but loud enough for them to hear. Dad's hand froze mid-bite, but he didn't say anything right away. I could feel the pressure of his stare, even though he hadn't looked up from his plate. Finally, he muttered, "I didn't know women could be in charge of things like that." I felt the words sting, but I didn't let them break me. Not this time. "I've earned this, Dad," I said, my voice calm but cutting through the tension. "I've earned every inch of this promotion. And that's more than you've ever given me credit for." Mom's fork dropped with a soft clink, but it wasn't loud enough to break the weight hanging in the air. Ryan shifted in his seat but didn't speak. For a moment, everything went still. Dad's eyes flicked up to mine, his face tight with something I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was anger, maybe shame. "You think this is some kind of triumph? You really think you've done something special?" I didn't back down. "I do. I've worked harder than anyone else, and I don't need you to tell me that it's not enough." He glared at me, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. The world he had built in his mind, the one where success meant a desk job, a safe career, was cracking. But that wasn't my problem anymore. "I'm not going to apologize for who I am, Dad," I added, my voice quiet but firm. "And I'm not going to keep proving myself to you." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. The meal continued, but the air felt thick, oppressive. I couldn't sit there any longer. I stood up, pushing my chair back with a little more force than necessary, and excused myself. I didn't wait for anyone to respond. I didn't care anymore. Upstairs, I retreated to my room, where the quiet of my own space felt like a breath of fresh air. I didn't want to be part of that dinner table anymore, not with the way things had gone. I was done being the invisible daughter, the one who had to earn scraps of recognition from people who never understood what it cost me to get where I was. I sat on my bed and pulled my phone out, reading the texts from coworkers again, the congratulations still fresh. It wasn't the same as hearing it from them, but at least it was real. I didn't need my father's approval. I had built this on my own. And for once, I wasn't going to shrink from it. The news of my promotion might have been the breaking point for him, but for me, it was the beginning of something new, something I was finally going to claim for myself. The next few days felt like a long, drawn-out breath I couldn't quite exhale. I kept replaying the dinner conversation in my head, my father's dismissive comments, the tension that clung to the air like fog. But more than that, I felt something I hadn't fully realized before. I was tired. Tired of fighting for respect. Tired of shrinking myself to fit into his version of who I should be. It wasn't just the promotion, though that had certainly opened my eyes. It was years of being belittled, of my choices being treated like they were beneath him. He never cared about my job the way he cared about Ryan's. He never asked me how my day went, never seemed interested in the way I carried. His silence, his refusal to even acknowledge the things I'd accomplished, it had all been building up, and I was done swallowing it. I couldn't keep pretending it didn't hurt. So, I made a decision. That evening, after dinner, I found him sitting in his recliner again, the TV still playing some show he'd probably seen 100 times. The house felt too quiet, as if everything was holding its breath. "Dad, we need to talk," I said, standing in the doorway, not giving him the option to ignore me. He didn't look up at first. His eyes stayed glued to the screen, the faintest shrug of his shoulders suggesting he was preparing for another round of small talk. But when I didn't move, he glanced over, sighing like he was already tired of whatever I was about to say. "What is it now, Sarah?" His voice was flat, resigned. "I already told you how I feel about all this. I don't get it, but..." "No," I cut him off, firm. "This time, I'm not letting it go." He set the remote down, his posture stiffening as he turned his full attention to me. I could feel the weight of his gaze, a mix of defensiveness and curiosity. "For years, you've treated me like I'm second-rate," I said, keeping my voice even. "You've undermined everything I've done, every decision I've made. The career I've built, You've never once taken it seriously. I've been your daughter, but I've always been invisible to you. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. I wasn't giving him a chance to deflect this time. Every time I worked a late shift or came home with stories about cases I solved, you brushed it off like it didn't matter. And then you started with the comments, how I was just a desk jockey, or that women don't belong in this field. But all that time, you never once asked me about the work I was doing. You never asked me how hard it was to stand up for what I believe in, to take the risks I've taken. I could feel the tension building in him, his fists clenched against the armrests, but I didn't stop. I've been fighting for your approval since the day I got my badge, and I'm done. I'm done pretending it doesn't hurt every time you make me feel like I'm not enough. My voice cracked, but I quickly regained control. I'm not asking for your praise. I'm just asking for you to see who I am, not who you want me to be. The room was silent after that, heavy with the words I'd said. Dad was staring at me, but his eyes weren't cold anymore. There was something else there, something softer, maybe even ashamed. But he didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he exhaled, the sound low and almost tired. I didn't understand your choices, Sarah, he said, his voice quieter than I expected. I don't know why you didn't go into something safer, something stable. I wanted you to have a family, to settle down. I never thought you'd get into all this danger and violence. And when I saw you go down that path, I was scared. I wasn't sure how to process that. My father, admitting fear. It wasn't what I had expected. But you've earned your place, haven't you? He continued, his voice still steady, but tinged with something close to respect. You've become someone I don't really recognize, but I can see now that it's not a bad thing. I respect who you are, Sarah. The weight of his words hit harder than I expected. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a sudden shift in the way he saw me. But it was the first time in years that he had acknowledged me, not just as his daughter, but as the person I'd become. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The truth was, I wasn't sure how to move forward with him now. I couldn't just forget the years of hurt, the years of his dismissiveness, but hearing him finally admit that he respected me, that was something I hadn't thought possible. I don't need your approval anymore, I said quietly, the words coming easier now. But I needed you to understand. I needed you to see me. And for once, it feels like you do. Dad didn't reply. Instead, he reached for the remote again, but he didn't turn the TV back on. The silence between us was different now, less oppressive, less bitter. It was an uncomfortable quiet, but one that felt like it might lead somewhere else, somewhere that wasn't rooted in expectations or resentment. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. And maybe, just maybe, my father didn't feel like he was losing me. Maybe we could both live with that. The night of the ceremony arrived, and I felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. It wasn't the same kind of nervousness I used to get, back when I was still looking for validation, still craving approval. This time, it was different. I was standing in front of my peers, my colleagues, people who knew exactly what I had earned and why I deserved to be here, but it still felt unreal, like I might wake up at any moment and find out none of it had really happened. The venue was grand, full of the city's top brass and influential figures in law enforcement. Officers in uniforms and formal suits mingled, shaking hands, exchanging congratulations. It was a celebration of achievement, of hard work, of survival in a field that demanded the best and most resilient. I'd been waiting for this day for so long, but now that it was here, I wasn't sure what to expect. The ceremony went smoothly, the usual speeches about dedication and service, but when they called my name, everything went still. Detective Sarah Collins, come up to the stage, please. The applause started slowly, then grew, loud and powerful. It was deafening. A standing ovation. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this scene. The crowd's recognition was like a tangible thing, like it wrapped around me and held me up as I walked toward the stage. When I took the stage and shook hands with the commissioner, the applause seemed to stretch on forever. For a moment, I wanted to look back, find my parents, find anyone I knew who might be there, but I didn't. I stayed in the moment, focusing on the people who truly understood what this meant. My colleagues, the department. These were the people who knew what it took to get here, who had witnessed the long hours and the late nights. They knew how hard I'd worked to be more than just a statistic, to be more than just the woman on the force. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel proud. Proud of everything I had done. Proud of the countless cases I'd worked, the lives I had helped, and the respect I had earned. The applause faded as I took my seat among my fellow detectives. For once, I felt like I belonged. After the ceremony, there were congratulations from everyone: fellow officers, the higher ups, even people I didn't know. It was nice, but it didn't hold the same weight. The words from Lieutenant Harris were the ones that mattered most. His message came through just as I was leaving the event. "I couldn't be prouder of you, Sarah. You've shown more leadership than most of us could ever hope for. You earned this, and I'm grateful for everything you've done for this department." That hit me harder than anything else. His words meant more to me than any medal or plaque I could have received. Harris had seen me struggle, seen me rise from the rookie who was always trying to prove herself to someone who finally belonged. He had watched me grow, and his gratitude wasn't just for my work, it was for the kind of leader I had become. I sat in my car for a few minutes before heading home, letting the words sink in. For the first time in a long while, I felt a quiet sense of peace. When I walked through the door at home, the house felt different. I wasn't expecting fireworks or a grand welcome, but there was something about the space, less heavy, less filled with the weight of unspoken expectations. My father's absence in the kitchen felt easier to breathe in. I didn't need his approval anymore. I didn't need to prove myself to him or anyone. I pulled my phone out and reread Harris's message one more time, then set it down on the counter. The weight of the night, the recognition, the years of hard work, it all felt like it had finally come full circle. I was done seeking validation. I was done chasing after something I knew wasn't coming. I had earned this, and no one could take that from me. Not my father, not anyone. As I headed upstairs, I paused at the top of the stairs and looked down at the hallway that led to my old bedroom. That old girl was still there, still part of me, but I had grown into someone new, someone stronger, someone who knew her worth. I was done pretending I didn't already have everything I needed to move forward. And tonight, for the first time, I was truly at peace with that. I wasn't going back to my parents' house for validation. I didn't need their approval anymore, but there was a part of me that wanted to see if anything had changed. When I walked through the door, my father was sitting in his recliner, flipping through the newspaper. He didn't look up right away, but when I stepped into the room, he paused. For a brief moment, there was only silence, but then he nodded. A small, almost imperceptible gesture. "Detective." It was simple, quiet, but it was the most respect he had shown me in years. I didn't need more than that. He wasn't smiling, wasn't making a big deal of it. But in that moment, I understood. He had seen me. For who I was, not who he had wanted me to be. Mom was in the kitchen, as usual, setting the table. She gave me a smile, but it wasn't the usual forced one. It was softer, like she had finally realized something too. She didn't ask about the ceremony. She didn't mention anything about the promotion. We just sat down to dinner, the same as always. But it was different this time. No one commented on my career or made any backhanded remarks. The conversation flowed easily, almost like the tension from all the years before had evaporated. It was a quiet dinner, but this silence felt comfortable, not heavy. No one needed to talk about the accolades. No one had to say anything more. The shift had already happened. They respected me, even if they never said it outright. As I finished my meal, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had brought me here: the struggles, the doubts, the frustration, and the quiet victories that had built up over time. I wasn't a little girl anymore, hoping for someone to tell me I was good enough. I was living authentically, no longer chasing after someone else's idea of success. I stood up to leave, grabbing my coat and bag. My next assignment was waiting. As I walked toward the door, I turned back to look at them one last time. Mom smiled, Dad nodded again. The unspoken acknowledgement between us was enough. I stepped out into the quiet night, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was walking forward. Not just physically, but emotionally. It wasn't about proving myself to anyone anymore. It was about living on my own terms. And in that moment, that was enough.